Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Kelly Barrett, your host of Etcetera here on Live on the Vibe. So excited for my guest today. We have singer, songwriter, artist, music correspondent, author, mentor, Juno Award winner Christopher Ward is in the house with us today. Hey, Christopher.
How's it going, Kelly? Can you add dog trainer to that as well, please?
I'm thinking you probably have your pilot's license and, a doctorate in a thing or two. Wow.
I do not, but there's still
Christopher,
time for it, right?
there's still time, right? I will say this, Christopher, when I was preparing for this interview, I thought, you begin? Where do you begin with somebody who has just had so many incredible, adventures and musical ventures and has been just such a huge part of Canadiana and Canadian, the music industry in Canada. And so, we have the new album to talk about. We've got the book to talk about, the launch of the new website, which is scrolling down at the bottom of the screen. So I figured the only way to start things off with somebody who has done so much is to kind of start maybe back at the beginning a little bit. So, Christopher, could you take us back to your Second City days?
Oh, gosh. It's funny. I was just thinking about that today. I was in the Second City touring company with some just extraordinarily talented people like Ron James and Deborah McGrath and Bruce Peary and, of course, Mike Myers, who everybody knows. And
Right.
it was a diversion for me from my career as a songwriter and musician, but it was quite useful. You learn to kind of trust your own ideas as you throw them out there and to take more risks as you're creating. And that's what I learned from Second City. It's a fantastic experience.
Right. And so was that the beginning of your career in the entertainment industry? Was that your first foray into entertaining people?
Well, I went to Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario, and my friend Stephen Stone and I started the campus radio station. And then I got hired to do the all-night show at CKPT Radio in Peterborough. So in a sense, that was my first showbiz gig, a really glamorous one at that.
The midnight shift. Perfect.
We all do our graveyard time, right?
Right. And so I want to talk a little bit about October of 80, the City Limits. So this is your pre-much days when you were hosting at City Limits back in 83. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Mike Myers became a regular guest and debuted his famous Wayne from Wayne's World character. And then went on to invite you to play in the Austin Powers band in the movies. And what was it like on City Limits? And I know that some of your first guests were Kim Mitchell and Bon Jovi. And can you tell us a little bit about what that was like to interview these huge artists?
Well, it was chaos because, there was kind of no guardrails for us. It was live TV. It was overnight. It was Friday and Saturday nights from midnight till 6. And we kind of operated on the assumption that no one was watching, which gave us complete and utter freedom to do what we want, which was pretty much close to being true. It's funny, they're very nostalgic about a show that I didn't even know they were watching, but there you go. And there weren't a lot of places for artists to go to be interviewed in those days. There wasn't a music television network, obviously. So, you got to have access to people like Kim and Lee Aaron as well. She came on the show, one of her very early interviews, and certainly one of mine as well.
Right.
It was really fun. I was learning my craft. I think I did one of Corey Hart's earliest interviews on that show, and it was great fun. What it was, though, is and I think maybe I didn't see the strings being pulled by the puppeteers above me, but it was like a kind of a planning ground for what Much Music would become. And they applied to the CRTC to get a license for the music channel while we were busy doing Limits. And they would show City Limits to the CRTC and say, well, this is kind of what we want to do. Maybe not as wacky. And then, we would, sort of transitioned into Much when they got the license.
And so you're speaking of Moses and John Martin, I would imagine, as the powers that be.
Yes, indeed.
Right. And so, Christopher, I heard an interesting story. I'm going to talk about the book here right away, but I read so many interesting facts in that book. And there's something that's kind of a funny story about your first guest, Kim Mitchell.
Right.
And there was something that he did during the countdown, which I thought was hilarious. Do You want to share that with the viewers?
It's just it's pretty crude, but the last time I saw Kim, we did laugh about it. Yeah. So first interview, I'm in a state of not terror, but certainly high tension and nervousness and everything else. Kim, who's done a million interviews before, is just like, yeah, whatever. And it's like, okay, coming to you guys in 5, 4, 3. And at that moment, Kim takes one of his rather long, thin digits and just rams it up my nose. Right? 1, and I'm sitting there with Kim's finger up my nose. So, what can I say? It was an experience that goes on the resume.
What a great story. I would have died. I would have died. And then I hear that Bon Jovi was the band, one of your first bands that you interviewed, that kind of didn't want to leave.
Well, we got a call from the record company rep, who was someone we knew and trusted and liked. And she's like, look, guys, I've got this band in town. Nobody knows them. They're playing the El Macambo. There's going to be about 20 people there. Would you please bring them? Can we have them on your show? And I'm like, yeah, of course. You do stuff for your friends, right? And so she brings these guys down, and they're just like as spunky as can be. And they're just like, yeah, rock and roll, yeah, And we did a brief interview because really there wasn't a lot to talk about. Yeah, exactly, horns. And but what had happened in the interim is it was during the transition to Much, and everything was in even more chaos than normal, and we had lost their only video. And so we thought, well, we might as well make something out of this. So we had them roam through the building searching for their video, and they were like literally tearing apart people's desks and cupboards and all this sort of stuff. Fortunately, we had somebody who did eventually find the video, and we played it on the show. But that was the Bon Jovi appearance, was them going through the thing and pulling stuff out of, boxes and things. It was pretty funny. So cut to 4 years later, Slippery When Wet sells 11 million copies. They come to town and they're like, we're only doing one interview. And this was the interview they did. So we had a Bon Jovi barbecue up on the balcony looking over the parking lot, and all the kids were in the parking lot. And yeah, it was pretty cool. And it was kind of an indicator of who they were as people and artists, the way that they related to their fans, and that incredible level of loyalty that they had to those people that sort of brought them along, including, in a very small way, us at City Limits.
For sure. And then so you cut your teeth in City Limits, and and then August 31st of 1984, it was such a fantastic time musically, at the height of Canadian music, like a music explosion that, literally Canadian music forever. There was everywhere for anybody who wanted to work on the road all year round. And then Much music, take us back to that day on August 31st, 1984, when you burst through that chroma key paper and come crashing into our living rooms. What was that like?
Well, again, it was the usual spirit of chaos with which Much went about its business, and it never changed. I mean, certainly while I was there. Because instead of having like a, sedate sort of broadcast event and a launch and everything else, they were like, no, we're going to have a full-on party. So the entire place was just packed with, drunken rock and roll people just raging away. And it was actually really good training for me, because if you remember watching Much music, there was always so much going on. There were people walking back and forth, and people on phones, and people yelling at one another across the room. And, when you're on air and hosting, you kind of just had to cope with that. And I got to the point where it was just so normal that people would walk right in front of me while I was addressing the camera, because they didn't realize that I was on air live. It just looked that relaxed. And it was a little less relaxed the night of the launch, because it was obviously such an important occasion. We were behind a giant piece of chroma key paper, J.D. Roberts and me. And I think he, being the Boy Scout that he was, had taken a penknife and made a slit down the center of the thing, so that we didn't just get trapped behind the paper or something and failed to launch. And I'm claustrophobic, so I was really uncomfortable back there to begin with, But as always, JD was like the rock, as he still is when you see him on air. Anyway, we came bursting through and launched a television network, and the rest is history, right?
as they say, history. And I love, and I'm getting a lot of my information from the book, but like to work in that kind of, in the book, it's called Legitimate Chaos, where you have total creative freedom, and they called it 98 television, where Moses and John were basically like, do whatever you want, just don't spend any money.
Yeah, that's a that's a pretty funny motto. But it was also kind of like that was their style. That was the City TV Toronto style. Um, Moses very much wanted to break down all of the traditional broadcast barriers. He didn't like formality. Like, for instance, with the news teams, I think he was one of the first guys to have them literally away from that sort of desk with the phone and the kind of the microphone in front of them. Welcome to the news. Like those, like he's just like, no, we're not doing that, right? And people would wander from one space to another. So there was this sense of fluidity and kind of a kinetic quality about it. And he wanted to kind of move that over to much. So that's kind of why you'd see shots in the street. You'd see us interacting with people randomly live. I mean, it was always that live risk that people would misbehave, and of course they did. Or we'd be up on, like, Robert Plant comes. What are we going to do with Robert? Well, let's do the interview on the roof. Okay. Iggy Pop comes. Iggy Pop's like, partway through doing a concert, and he grabs an acoustic guitar and climbs through the window onto Queen Street and starts singing a song about people on Queen Street, Just, again, it was that randomness that I think that's where the magic of Much Music lay. And you had to get comfortable with that, and not everybody would be. And really, in a way, like Second City was, for me, the best possible training, just to kind of make that link for you. Because, when you're on stage and you're improvising, you've seen improv comedy, I'm sure. It's basically maybe you get a suggestion from the audience and you just have to run with it and come up with something. Much Music was kind of in the same spirit. So I think I was ready for it, and I think we certainly did the best we could with what we had.
Right, and it must have been incredible. And you answered one of my questions, Christopher, that I was going to ask you is, what do you think it was about Much Music that literally captivated a nation? And I think you just you hit the nail on the head when it was just that, on any given day, anything could happen, anything goes. And that naturalness that comes along with things not being so, scriptured or like scripted. And, I love, and I want to get to some of the guests that you interviewed and stuff. And I love that you mentioned, I'm going to just skip off to this, that you say in the book, that you interviewed Leonard Cohen. And when you interviewed Cohen, you were mildly terrified.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, well,
because you admired and respected him so much.
Well, I'd read his poetry when I was, a very young guy, like in my teens. I mean, because, like I'm a songwriter and lyricist and all that. So, I mean, I started writing poetry before I started writing songs. So Leonard Cohen was a little bit like interviewing God in a black suit, Right. And, he has a presence just when he walks in the room, it's like, okay, take a deep breath, folks. This is going to be serious, Yeah. He also, of course, has a tremendous sense of humor, but it takes a while for that to emerge. But I respected him so much, and I loved his work so much. I was just intimidated is the best word I can think of. And of course, what happened was he could not have been more genteel, more generous with his time, and more open. And weirdly, I did something which I never did. I don't know why I did this. I quoted a bad review that he'd had. And I never did that. I'm not one of those people who sort of like in a confrontational mode would say, well, I hear that you're such and such, blah, blah, blah. I don't know why I did it, but I did it. And I said, so playing the hometown must be a tough gig, because he'd done a Montreal show like the night before. I said, I just saw the review that describes you as having, all of the charm of a small town undertaker. And he laughed, and he went, some of those guys are exceptionally charming. It was like, he just went with it. Yeah. So it all ended well with Leonard. And in fact, I interviewed him another time later. So
perfect. I love, and I I love that you would be real enough, Christopher, to mention that, that you were, mildly terrified. And I'm familiar with that feeling. I felt it about half an hour ago, truthfully. And, but
Well,
honestly, isn't that part of the,
yeah.
right? It's gone now, Christopher. We're good. We'll be doing lunch when I come to Toronto. We're good now.
Okay.
But don't you think, Christopher, that that's almost part of the appeal? That nervous tension while you're excited and you're nervous. It's almost kind of part of the appeal, I think, because I know for myself, I handpick all of my guests. And of course, I base them on people that I respect and admire and want to meet. So there is always that little bit of excited nervousness. Today, there was a little more than normal. But isn't that part of the excitement, I think, of being a correspondent?
Well, it's like when I watch the hockey players standing on the blue line when they're playing the national anthem. Have you noticed how they sort of rock back and forth? They've got their bodies, they're like spinning like little, tops all in place, and they're just waiting for that moment to sort of unleash that pent up energy. And in a way, you can kind of feel that when you're in broadcast television. It's like all the anticipation, all the research that you've done. I mean, especially with somebody that has that much history and stuff that matters to you. I think the tension is useful. I think it keeps you on your toes. And
Sure does.
that's always, I think, a good state to be in. As long as it's not to the point where you're so terrified you don't function, then it's not good.
Right. Probably need a new career choice.
Well, you definitely shouldn't be working live television if you have that feeling.
Right.
It's funny what you were talking about people, why they loved watching much in those days. I think it was because they loved to see us fail. That they loved to see us, not fail, that's too strong a word, but they loved to see us fall on our faces, because then it's like watching improv comedy. You're going, okay, how are they going to pick themselves up off the mat and go back into the ring,
Right. I think they love to see you just being human. I don't know if to fail or to just be human. And I think that made, we loved all the VJs. We felt like they were our friends, and you guys were so relatable. And I think, that there's something to what you're saying about it. People tune in for that. And all of a sudden, I think part of the charm, and you'll probably agree, is that now you can see your favorite artist up close and personal in videos. So you were able to watch their music, but you also you got to meet them as people. And, I remember I visited 299 Queen Street West, and I think it was 1986. And it was a spectacle. It was like being at Graceland or something. Like people would just hover around and stare in the windows, and it was just insanity.
It was, and yet it was also our workplace. I loved it. I have very nostalgic feelings for that time and those experiences. But it was great.
And so, Christopher, was there ever a moment where what was that moment like when it hits you that this is huge? Much music this is going to be huge.
Well, again, when you're operating in a studio setting, I mean, you see the people on the street, and if a big artist would come, like if Duran Duran shows up, then there's just chaos in the street. So that's when you get a sense of feedback. I think for me though, it really occurred when I did a tour across the country. We called it Crisscross Canada, and I went to all 10 provinces on the Yukon, and it was 40 days and 25 flights, and we would go to small towns and stuff, and we would go visit the cable companies, and we'd visit local radio, and but when we were walking around the streets, people in Lethbridge, Alberta would come up to us and go, "Hey, rock and roll, how's it going, man?" And it was like, oh, right, we're everywhere. And it happened over and over again. And it was incredibly heartwarming. And it was really reaffirming of, okay, we're on to something. We're doing a good thing here. We're giving people something that they need and want. And it reminded me, this is an odd comparison maybe, but when I was a kid, I was just wired to the radio. And what the disc jockeys on the radio offered was like my personal teenage heroin. It was like everything was pop music to me. And I remember going down to the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto as a kid because they would have the remote unit and the disc jockeys would come and do their shows from the remote and you could actually see what they looked like. They often didn't look like what they sounded like, I will add that. But it was just the pure, the joy of what they gave me and how much it mattered to me and how it changed my life. And I realized that, we were kind of like the newer version of that.
For sure. For sure. And Christopher, the thing that I love, I'm going to pull out the book now. So this is the book, Is This Live? And I have to say this, Christopher, I love reading musical biographies. I read a ton of, musical based literature. This hands down is one of the most fascinating, candid, slightly scandalous. It's slightly scandalous, Christopher Ward, collection of music memorabilia I have ever, hands down, ever read. And I am so grateful that.
Thank you very, very much. That's a very meaningful comment. I really appreciate it.
I mean it, and I'm so grateful that you put it together. Those days when it was such a fantastic time in the Canadian music industry. All these new bands were just bursting through the airwaves, and it was such an exciting time. And thankfully that it's all recorded and it's right here. And the book is so candid. There's you don't just talk about the good parts. You talk about worst interviews. You talk about, there's a line in the book when you're referencing back to how you could literally pretty much do anything you wanted. There's a line in the book that says, somebody could literally whip their penis out and nobody would say a word. It'd be like, well, there's something they probably haven't seen before. That's a wrap. and so you're so candid and truthful about, fire alarms going off during a LaToya Jackson interview.
Yeah.
It's a scintillating read, and it's fascinating.
I'm glad it did that for you because I know that was your era. So if we represented your era well, then that means it's a success. It was so much fun to write.
And I love.
I went back and talked to all my old coworkers. Most of whom mercifully are still around. I did new interviews with everybody from. Jane Siberry, the Parachute Club, to Loverboy, to Bryan Adams, to Glass Tiger, to Luba. I mean, all the luminaries of the 80s. And you know what's the theme that ran through? There was a couple of things that ran through those interviews that I did. One, that they said the minute Much Music played their video, their lives and careers changed forever. Like Jan Arden, she was like, yeah, everything was going along, my career was coming along, and then you guys played me, and she said the next day I couldn't go to the grocery store. I mean, and Larry Gowan said exactly the same thing. He said it just was, he said, I didn't know what hit me. It was so fascinating and how quickly it happened, literally overnight. And the other thing that struck me about the interviews was that at the end of the day, if you got them talking about their whole careers and the early Much period and where it fits in the picture, they would always end up saying it was the best time of my life. And I loved that. And I thought, well, it was certainly one of the best times in mine. That's for sure. And I'm glad you guys feel that way.
I would imagine. What a privilege and an honor to be a part of something. It's historical. It's, it's Canadiana at its finest. And, I'd love to that Mike Myers, your good friend, wrote the foreword. And and all the comments on the book are just people absolutely just love it. And I just want to pop in here and let people know Christopher has launched a new website, and that's scrolling at the bottom of your screen. You can get the book there. You can check out the new album there that we're going to be talking about in just a second here. So everything Christopher Ward, new site down at the bottom. It's scrolling right down at the bottom of the screen. And so we're going to get into a little juice here, Christopher. I jumped. I don't know if it's human nature, but I jumped immediately. I've read the whole book cover to cover, but I jumped immediately to the worst interviews because I was so impressed that you had actually mentioned some of your worst interviews. And we were talking about this before the show, and I think Elvis Costello was right up there.
It's funny that you mentioned this because I remember right after the book came out, this is a few years ago now, and I was curious to know how people were responding to it. And I would ask people, so you read the book, what was the first thing you went? We went to the worst interviews. It was like that was the go-to for the entree into the book. And I guess, and I understand why. It's not because it's salacious, but because it's like, I mean, everything else you could have seen if you were watching in real time. You would have gone, oh, well, there's this interview, there's that, and so on. But this was like what was going on behind the interviews in the minds of the VJs and, the people that were having to do the interviews. It gave you an additional layer of insight, I think. Costello, you know what? The truth of that one is, Kelly, that at the end of the interview, I just thought, oh, God, thank heavens that's over now. It was just so tense through the whole thing because he's like one of those like in-your-face people and, he does not suffer fools gladly. And maybe I was one, I don't know. I was a fan. I was an admirer of his music. It wasn't that I came in with an attitude about his work in any way at all. I came in with full respect for his considerable accomplishments at the time. But he was just in a mood. But then I realized, I looked back at it when I went to read the book, because I thought this has got to be one of my worst. And I had a completely different take on the interview. And I realized that was his, not pose, but that was his vibe. That was the essential Elvis kind of. That's how he presents, and that's the character that he wanted to put across. And it's kind of a post-punk, he's very articulate, but at the same time, he's also kind of primitive in his attitudes. I don't like that. I hate that. And it was
Great.
shocking to me, And I remember I was working on a series about songwriting, and I asked him, how would you mind if we like deconstructed one of the songs that you've written? And he's like, I don't know, it's like taking a child's toy apart, I was like, ooh, sorry. So it was a tough interview, but it wasn't a bad interview at all. In fact, it was really interesting to watch in retrospect. So there were a lot worse. Well, for you.
There's where and there's a quote from the book that he says, heavy metal is boring music for boring people by boring people. And then, and we'll move on. And then Eric M. has a quote in the book saying that she's talking about Kiss. Chances are Kiss is not watching right now, so I'm going to go ahead and say this. But she said they were the most disgusting bunch of jerks. And she's quoted as saying, those bastards are such misogynists and were so rude to me on camera. Who knew Kiss and Elvis Costello?
Well, I don't for a second put those two in the same category, Kelly. But it was interesting when I added up the best and the worst. Kiss, I think, would have gotten an overall award for the worst interviews. I mean, Gene Simmons had really mastered the art of insulting people. And Laurie Brown tells a story where I guess she was trying to, prod something out of him. And she said something to the effect of like, well, what do you really want from women? And he just ran with it, of course. He said, well, I want them to lick the bottoms of my boots. And it was like, and she was disgusted and outraged, but in a way she kind of, set him up for it, right?
Right. Tricky question. Well, so yeah, Kiss is off the Christmas card list, Christopher.
They were never on mine. It's funny because I do a podcast. I do a podcast called Famous Lost Words with my partner is Tom Jokic, and he's a radio producer from Toronto. And he also is an archivist, and he digs deep into their archives of vintage interviews. And his favorite band is Kiss. So he and I always have this ongoing sort of war of, who could be the worst band in the world that you would actually like. And of course, his is Kiss. So I have to live with that. Right. They won't
Different
leave.
Strokes, I guess.
Yeah, they will not leave my life. They may be off the Christmas card list, but they're still around.
On the other end of the spectrum, Christopher, who would you say was maybe one of your favorite interviews on Much?
There's a bunch for different reasons.
Great.
Tina Turner was fantastic. I mean, she's just such a radiant star. She's a radiant woman. And if you know her stories, I'm sure you do. And I'd read her autobiography before I interviewed her. it's a harrowing story of the survival of a woman in very, very tough conditions, being abused and controlled by a man. And, these are serious stories that need to be told. And she just laid it all out there. But at the same time, she did it, when she presented herself, it was without bitterness. It was with the joy of being free of that time, having experienced incredible success that she did not expect, and loving what she's doing, loving singing, loving making records, loving touring. And, if you see her on stage, it was the same person. And
Right.
I just was so taken with her presence. She was inspiring, and she just kind of illuminated the room when she walked in. She was great. But there's a lot of other interviews that were, interviewing George Harrison, I can't ever forget that one. I grew up with the Beatles. It was like the interview that I'd been prepping for since I was 14, right?
Right.
And he didn't let me down. He was, funny and interesting. And he was one of those interview subjects, and I'm sure you've had the experience where you're interviewing people who've been interviewed a lot, where they kind of go on automatic pilot. It's
Right.
like push play, right? They'll just give you the answer that, so you have to try to, shape the questions in a way that you don't get those stock answers out of people.
Right.
But he didn't go to that at all. He really thought about what he was saying, which made it really, really fascinating. And my moment of Beatles Zen happened at the end of the interview. So camera's no longer on, but the camera was still rolling, I discovered later. And we'd gone to video. We were standing up. He was lighting a cigarette. We're looking, and all the chaos in the room had resumed at the end of the interview. And he looks over, and he looks around the room, and he looks at me, and he goes, "This is a very casual program." And I just thought,
Awesome.
thank you for that little, it was like my own personal bit of Beatle wit, which I love passing on to people.
Right. That's a great story, Christopher. And the book, guys, Is This Live, is filled. Everything that you're hearing Christopher talk about right now, the book is full of more of these little scandalous tidbits and some happy stories and some wild and crazy, all kinds of shenanigans. I love that word, shenanigans. And I just read a quote here from Eric M. that I think sums up the book perfectly. And it says, "For so many of us, working at Much Music was a time of beautiful chaos. Christopher's vivid storytelling transported me back to those crazy days making groundbreaking TV on a shoestring budget. He's done a remarkable job recapturing life behind the scenes at Much, with interviews and anecdotes from everyone who made the nation's music station the defining voice for Canadian pop culture in the 80s and the 90s. What we did at 299 Queen Street will never be replicated. This book explains why." I love that. It's a perfect summarization of the book.
I was so touched when she wrote that. Erica's a friend of mine, and so I was grateful that she wanted to blurb the book. But what she said is just so touching and insightful, as you would expect from her.
Right. Very eloquent. Yeah. And actually, when I read that the first time, I got slightly nostalgic and slightly misty. And yeah, excellent book, guys. You won't be disappointed. It's something that I've all week long, some friends of mine, I was like texting them, "Yeah, the book said this, and we'll never guess what happened here."
Oh.
And apparently Kiss, because most of my friends are musicians, and so everybody's getting their copy, and it's just an incredible piece of Canadiana, literally hands down the best I've ever read. And Christopher, I'd like to talk a little bit. You betcha. If we could talk a little bit about your songwriting, what's it like to just write hit songs? You have written songs, Chris, for such amazing artists, Diana Ross, Hilary Duff, Winona Judd, the Backstreet Boys, Amanda Marshall, and of course, Alana Miles, the worldwide #1 hit, Black Velvet. Can you tell us about where that inspiration came from?
Well, it's funny. Every writer you talk to has their own method of what they do, right? It may be similar to somebody else's, but there are nuances that make it their own. And I really only know how I work. And I'm kind of a collector. It's like things that are sticky, that stick to me. I put them in a notebook and I hang on to them. And I'm always putting little ideas down on my phone and then going back to them later. And I will have completely forgotten an idea. That's the great thing about ideas. They come and go quickly, and you don't bother latching onto them. You just get them down and you can use them later. And so a lot of times, when I'm trying to come up with something, I'll just go back through my notes and through the little audio notes as well, and find some bits and pieces to put together. So every song kind of has its own story. Some, because I worked with a lot of artists, were written, I don't want to say to order, but they were written specifically for that artist, in the sense that, you got to take everything into account when you're working with an artist. Like what's their vocal range, right?
Right.
Like how far can they stretch? How much sort of pure dynamic and power do they have in their voice? Because if you're writing these big soaring melodies and they have these tiny little voices like Hilary Duff, it's going to sound terrible. So you don't do that. Right. You do stuff that's more within their wheelhouse, or you try to. Lyrically, you try to write stuff that's going to sound believable coming out of their mouths, right? So if I write a chorus for Hilary Duff when she was 15, it was like, I can't wait for the world to spin. I can't wait to be happening. It's like sweet. It's
perfect. No, it's perfect.
Yeah, and she sounded great. It was her first single too. Whereas with Diana Ross, it's like, my job was to write something that was more aspirational, and there's a regal quality about her. She was. Right. It was interesting working with her because, of course, everybody told me beforehand, it's like, oh, you're going on diva time now. Get ready, buddy. I'm like, well, okay, I'll deal with that if that's what happens. I'm not intimidated. I've certainly met the world as I have because of my much experiences.
Right.
We'll get what we get. And she was so gracious and sweet and complimentary, really open to new ideas and stuff. So you never know what you're going to get when you walk in the door. So for her, I wrote a song called Hope is an Open Window. And it was, hope is an open window, love an open door, to be there for each other is what we're sent here for. And, it's simple sentiment, but it has an almost spiritual kind of quality to it. And she delivered it like a gospel singer would. And, it wasn't a hit. I wish that it was, but it was not. But she did record it, and she did a beautiful job. And again, it's like I have that experience to carry me through. So, I guess that's a little bit of the process. I don't know if that explains it any better for you, Kelly.
That's perfect. And, I love, like you mentioned, and you're doing your master songwriters class, your songwriting master class. And I know that you love a good opening line because you say that it's literally the key to drawing you in.
Yeah. It totally is. Like, I think of some of my favorite opening lines, and I love those Southern songs, like songs that have weather in them, where you feel like you kind of know where you are and what time of day it is and what the season is. And, the Southern songs like, Midnight Train to Georgia and, Poke Salad Annie and Son of a Preacher Man. There's this languid, dreamy quality about them. To me, the best of all was Bobby Gentry's Ode to Billy Joe. It's all there in that first line. It was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day. It's like, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm yours. Take me,
Right.
And that's what you want a song to do in the opening line. And that's what I was trying to accomplish with Black Velvet when I wrote Mississippi in the Middle of a Dry Spell. I was aspiring to capture that kind of, feeling that something like Ode to Billy Joe did.
Right. You did such a fantastic job. I love when a song can literally transport me, not only with what I'm hearing, but visually. And the first line in Black Velvet, you are immediately transported, to the dusty and it's sultry and it's sexy and it's raw, and the video, people fell in love with that song. And you wrote that, of course, for your then girlfriend, Alana Miles. And, and just going back to what you were just sharing, Christopher, about, trying to write a song that that meshes and melds and marries with their voice. And that could not have been a better song for, because Alana Miles is sultry and she's sexy and she's, like what a perfect mix. And I heard you talking about a little story here about on your first date with Alana Miles when you took her home, and you know what I'm going to say. She invited you in, and you thought things were going to be happening, and then she pulled her guitar out and started serenading you instead. What was that like?
Well, it was a good second option. No, it was fantastic. I mean, I knew she was a singer, but I hadn't heard her sing before, and it was just like, oh my God, she can really sing. And
Sure can.
yeah, and it was like all that power and all that tone, it was all there in these sort of, starter songs that she had been working on. The thing that came later, interestingly, just about the voice, is the rasp, the Tina Turner rasp. Right. And she worked on it and worked on it and worked on it until she managed to get that down. Yeah, I mean, we became a couple pretty quickly, and just as quickly we started working on music together. And I mean, I a long time, recently I heard a demo from a long time ago that we had done, and it's like it was a template. It was all there, and it took her a long time to get a record deal and launch her career, but she had the goods right from the beginning. And most importantly of all, she had the drive. She had that nothing is going to get in my way attitude, which, not everybody responded well to. Some people were offended by her directness and her ambition. I mean, her ambition was raw and present, and you could not miss it. But you know what? Those are the people who succeed.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes too, I wonder if people would have been as offended if she hadn't been a woman, because I think sadly enough, a lot of times in the music industry, that type of determination and drive, then you might get called a bit of a bitch or hard to work with or that sort of, but good for her. When I saw her on Letterman, I was just so proud of her. The world fell in love with that song, and every female singer and every rock band out there, myself included, was singing that song, and it never got old. It just never got old, and it's a timeless song, Christopher. And I love that. Getting into talking about the new album, Same River Twice, which is coming out May 28th. You do a gorgeous rendition of Black Velvet, and I thought that was genius. That was genius. Was it always going to be on the album? Was that always going to be on this album?
Kelly, I was nervous about doing it because Alana's version is so definitive, and it's like I'm not going to compete with that, nor would I want to. But I thought, well, as the writer of the song, I must be able to find something else in there that needs to be revealed, that people haven't seen or felt. Now, why that song has had the enduring life that it has, I have no idea. I mean, I'm fairly analytical about things, and certainly about songs in particular. I love taking them apart and figuring out how they work. But as to why that song connected so deeply for people and why it has endured the way it has, I cannot tell you. So I really wavered about doing it, and the guys I work with are like, no, you're doing it. No, you're doing this song. So my hat's off to them, because in the end, I'm really happy with what we did. It's kind of like, if you imagine, it's at dusk. It's a few people sitting on a porch, like the one in the video, maybe in Atlantis video.
Right.
And you can sort of hear the sound of the foot on the boards, and a couple of guitars, and just this, like, there's some crickets in the background. This really languid, lazy kind of feeling, smoky, kind of a storyteller's version of it. Like you're just unfolding the details one at a time. So it's not like sung like a torch song. That's what Alana can do that I couldn't touch. But hopefully it's a little, I don't know, look into the process of the song's creation itself.
I felt like I was listening to it yesterday, and I felt like it's sultry, but in a different way. I described it as, to me, it's hauntingly beautiful. It's I absolutely loved it. Yeah, and the album. So this this album, Christopher, is symbolic of homecoming or a return, if you will. And I'm wondering, you spent so many times writing these, so much time writing these major hits for other artists, these mega hits. And then now you're writing an album that I'm guessing is slightly introspective and more about your own journey. Am I correct on that, Christopher?
Yeah, Kelly, you are. And again, I can't say why that happened. It's just when you're a creator, you try to just follow the muse. It's like if you're led in one direction, and it's like your guitar wants to go somewhere, and your melodies and lyric ideas want to go somewhere. The best thing you can do is just let them drive, and you just go along for the ride. And
For sure.
so I've just found I was writing these songs like Sway, which is the second single, and
Right.
it's a very personal, quiet kind of song. It's that end of the day, you're slow dancing with the
You're
person you
coming
love
together.
in the kitchen, and you don't really have to talk. It's just you're watching the shadows on the wall, and it's like trying to capture a miniature, like a little painting that's just, it's like, not to compare to Van Gogh, but like he has his little bedroom in Arles, which is one of my favorite paintings of his. It's just this tiny little humble bedroom, and there's the bed, and there's the chair, and there's the table, and it's like keeping things small and intimate, and those are the tiny stories that I wanted to tell with this.
Right.
So.
I listened to Sway yesterday over and over, and I was sharing it with a couple of friends that are in my little bubble. And I describe it as slow, sweet, and beautiful. I could almost see people using it for a wedding song, or, slow dancing at their 50th wedding anniversary. It's absolutely beautiful. And I almost thought I heard a little Leonard Cohen influence in that song,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I've certainly been
which is
influenced
great.
by Leonard Cohen. I mean, I've been influenced by a lot of people, but it's all mixed up. It's like you kind of throw everything in the pot and you stir vigorously, and then what comes out is a combination of those things. And I guess that certain songs are going to sound more influenced than others, like the song "Shatterproof," which is one of my favorites that's on the record. I think I had just been listening to one of the Keith Richards solo albums, which I love. I mean, I'm a huge Rolling Stones fan, but I also love Keith's solo work. And I think I was trying to write a song that I could imagine Keith singing. And so that's a whole other vibe than Leonard, right? But
Right.
yeah.
So I was curious, Christopher. Like I said, you've written so many hit songs for other people, and now you're writing this introspective. Which is more difficult, writing for other people, or really exposing your soul and your journey and putting it out there to the world? What is a more difficult undertaking?
Well, I mean, the challenges are similar, because you're using the same skill set, right? Your ability to craft a melody, your ability to come up with a believable lyric, your ability to do something that is memorable, that emotionally touches people. You still want to capture all that stuff, no matter what the name of the game is. I never thought of it as being, revealing in particular, because I don't think, anybody really cares that much about, who I've been with or why, what happened, like I think the stories themselves are more interesting than than reality. That's how it should be. I think. I put myself into them in as open-hearted a way as I possibly could, because I think that enables the listener to put themselves into the song as well, and kind of draw their own set of feelings from it. And some of the feelings are, there's regret, like in Shatterproof. I mean, he blew it, that guy. He blew it big time.
Big time.
And it's time to just kind of come clean and go, losing you is my one regret, and it's, give me that blindfold and that cigarette. It's like he's like, okay, I screwed up, man. And that's different than the song Sway. That's different than the place where Sway takes place, and it's, I think, similarly throughout the whole record. So it's a set of little little miniatures and feelings and experiences, and hopefully people connect with them.
Right. And the reason I asked that question, Christopher, is because when I was listening to the album yesterday, I just, there was like, I sensed there was a vulnerability that comes from, from really digging deep and sharing that, your own personal journey or experiences or just your own thoughts. And there's a vulnerability about, especially Sway. It's, you guys, you viewers, if you're watching, you have to check it out. The book, the album, all on Christopher's website here. Christopher, you are living a truly remarkable life. Is there anything that you haven't done that's still coming down the pipe? Because there's lots coming down the pipe. There's no grass growing under your feet. So, is there anything that's on your bucket list that you haven't done that you're going to look forward to doing?
Well, like anybody, I have my little dreams. You don't want to reveal them too soon in case they fall apart.
Right.
I don't want to go public with them. But I suppose, in an overview, I just want to be able to stay creative. Because a lot of times you think back on your favorite artists and it's like, they had a burst of creativity in their 20s and then that was kind of basically it. But I admire, people like Duke Ellington or Picasso or Paul McCartney, people who are late in life still kind of getting up and trying to do something new and always open to. And McCartney said that when I interviewed him. He was like, he says, I try to do it a different way every time. He says, I figure there's no one way to do things. And I don't, he's like saying, it's like, I don't have a corner on the market as to how to go about stuff. It's like, let's try something different. But that spirit is hard to maintain. It's a lot easier to just kind of be frozen in place and stick with what you know and what's worked.
Right.
But I love the creative process, and it still excites me, and I am so grateful for that.
And and Christopher, we're grateful for it too. I just, I have one more question, before we close off here. Yeah. If you could live one day over, one segment, one area of your life, what would it be and why?
Well, let's put aside the day my daughter was born, which was the best day of my life.
Right.
And being on the third baseline when Joe Carter hit the home run and the Jays won the World Series. We'll put that one aside too, because that's not in the realm of music. I guess you know what? The word event actually is kind of an interesting challenge to think about an event. I mean, probably a single power-packed, all-in-one-day event. It'd be hard to beat Live Aid. And I was in London for Live Aid and covered it for much. And it was a powerful experience for a lot of reasons. It was, in the moment, just seeing, everybody from Queen to Roxy Music to Sade to U2 all on one stage, one after the other, and then culminating with Paul McCartney and then McCartney and Pete Townsend hoisting Bob Geldof up on their shoulders triumphantly at the end of the show. But it was the human spirit that it took to create that event. And I interviewed Geldof around that time too. And he was like a man possessed. I've never met anybody who was so completely wired. I mean, it looked like he hadn't slept in a month. I mean, his eyes looked like train tunnels, and he was just so certain about what he was doing and the need for it and the drive. And I mean, those are rare moments in time when that happens, when those energies can kind of, come together as they did on that day. And I mean, what Bob Geldof did, I mean, he had help to be sure, but he also, he took the wheel and he made it happen. And it was so inspiring just to be a witness to that. And I think it would just be a very affirming experience to go back and not only see all the great music again, but also to experience the feeling of being part of it.
Right. What an extraordinary experience. What an extraordinary contribution to Canadian music. And it's just, you've been absolutely fascinating to talk to, and you're lovely, Christopher. You're warm, you're down to earth, you're candid. and in my mind, you're Canadian royalty, and I love that. I love when when you meet people that you hold in such high esteem, and then you meet them, and they're just they're just such warm, lovely, and just all open people. I can't thank you enough for being here today, Christopher. And I know I speak for everybody watching when I say we've been entertained by you, we've been inspired by you, we've been elevated by your contribution to the Canadian music industry, and we're proud to call you a fellow Canadian. We just love you.
Thank you. That is the kindest thing that I've heard in a very long time, and I know that
Oh,
in the heart, and I really appreciate it. I love what I do. I'm proud of the things that I've been able to accomplish, and I'm a proud Canadian as well. So thank you so much for that.
good stuff. Thank you so much for being here, Christopher. Once again, everybody, the book, the new album, check it out. Christopher's new website is scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Once again, Kelly Barrett for Etcetera Live on the Vibe. And until we see you next week, stay safe and sane and take care of each other. Take care. Bye-bye.